This is Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting. You're listening to the Corner Cutter Podcast.
Hey, welcome to the Corner Cutter Podcast. Podcasting since 2014. I'm your host, Josh, and this is the most consistent cubing podcast dedicated to entertain and educate you with in-depth conversations with cubers from all across the sport. My website is thecornercutterpodcast.com, and thank you so much for joining me today. Happy International Podcast Day. Yeah, that's right. Coming right up, September 30th, Sunday, is International Podcast Day. And you don't have to be a podcaster to celebrate. So if you enjoy listening to podcasts, definitely check out internationalpodcastday.com. And check out this promo.
International Podcast Day is September 30th, and you can help spread the word. You may be asking, what can I do to get involved? It's pretty simple. Head over to internationalpodcastday.com and check the suggestions. Then use hashtag International Podcast Day to join the conversation. You can reach out and connect with other podcasters, listeners, and your favorite podcast hosts. Remember September 30th, International Podcast Day, a day-long celebration of the power of podcasts.
So today on the podcast, I'm doing something a little bit different. I am bringing on two podcasting non-cubers. So the two guests are, first one, Hall of Fame podcaster Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com. He teaches podcasting, and his show is School of Podcasting. And then I'm having Emily Prokop on from the Story Behind podcast. I really enjoy listening to her podcast. It's short, 5 to 10 minutes, and you get to learn the story behind everyday objects. So I talk with Emily and Dave about what they think about cubing and their encounters with the Rubik's Cube. So we have an interesting discussion, and then after we talk about podcasting and talk about what they are doing for International Podcast Day. I'll have links to everything we mention in this episode in the show notes. You can check those out at thecornercutterpodcast.com/show notes. So now let's jump into the conversation with Dave Jackson. I have been listening to his podcast since December of last year, and I've learned so much about podcasting from him. He has a few different podcasts about podcasting: School of Podcasting, Ask the Podcast Coach, and Podcast Rodeo Show, and I enjoy all of them. My show would not be where it is right now if I hadn't been listening to the School of Podcasting. So I'm very thankful that Dave produces his show every week. And now here's my conversation with Hall of Fame podcaster Dave Jackson. Dave Jackson, welcome to the Corner Cutter Podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. Looking forward to this.
Now, starting off, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself so we kind of get where you're coming from with your answers?
Sure. I've been podcasting since 2005. I run the School of Podcasting, and what else would you like to know?
What is the School of Podcasting?
The School of Podcasting is an online website. It's not actually a lot of people think it's a physical school. Like, where can I go and like what are the classrooms like? And it's just an online website where there are probably at this point 15 different courses that lead you from an idea all the way into Apple Podcasts and getting your podcast launched and out there to your audience. So no matter where you're at, whether you're just got an idea or if you've already launched a podcast and you're looking to grow it, there are all sorts of courses, as well as a private Facebook group for networking. And then twice a month I do live group coaching. So if you have any other questions, you can get them answered live.
So is that your job?
That is one of my jobs. I work for a company called Libsyn, which is short for Liberated Syndication. They are the oldest and largest podcast media hosting company, and I've been working there about 2 years. And so when I got that job, the School of Podcasting became a really, really serious hobby at this point. So I do the School of Podcasting at night and on the weekends, and then I work at Libsyn during the day because I like health benefits, basically.
Okay. So jumping into one of the topics for today, what was your first encounter with the Rubik's Cube?
I can't remember what birthday it was, but I was probably like 10 or something like that. I was a little kid, and I got one for a birthday and sat there and twiddled it and twerked it, and we passed it around the room to see if anybody could figure it out, and nobody could. And then but it's one of those things that it always sat in my room, and so I'd go in and you'd pick it up, and if you were lucky, you could get like one side, that had all the colors right. But then all the other ones would be, completely messed up or whatever. So it was, for me, it was a ball of frustration. And that's why I have so much respect for you guys that you're like, oh yeah, I think when you guys say things like 3.8, I'm thinking days or weeks. And you're like, no, that's seconds. And I'm like, that's amazing.
Yeah. So have you ever met somebody that could actually solve it?
No, that's the part that was, I know earlier you had asked like what method I used or something like that. I'm like, I looked at it, twisted some stuff, and went, hey, look, I got some to line up. Oh, wait, no, those other ones aren't lined up. That was my method. So, and you got to remember, this is before YouTube, before the internet. I'm an old guy. I'm 53. So there's no way to cheat back then. You just had to figure it out.
Okay, yeah. So when you heard of my podcast and speed cubing, what was your first thoughts and reactions?
I couldn't believe I didn't know what speed cubing was, and when I finally figured out what it was, and it's all about the Rubik's Cube, I didn't, to me it's one of those things like almost like the Wizard of Oz, where you open up a door and everything goes from black and white to color. I had no idea this kind of thing even existed, or that it wasn't a matter of did you solve it, but how fast did you do it. So I just thought it was amazing that such a thing even exists. On occasion, somebody will ask me, what kind of niche or kind of super unique shows have you heard of? And now I always say, oh yeah, the Corner Cutter podcast is up there, and they go, what's that about? And I go, it's the Rubik's Cube. It's speed cubing. And people go, what's speed cubing? And I'm like, that's exactly what I said. But it's a thing, and a lot of people do it. So
hey, that's cool. I didn't know you mentioned my show that often.
Yeah, between it's that, and then there's another one. A guy does chameleon breeding. So it's a very unique show. But he makes cages for them, and so his thing there is, he talks about chameleons, and oh, by the way, if you need a cage, buy one of my cages, kind of thing. So that's another one that people go, it's about what? I go, chameleon breeding, and they're like, wow, that's unique.
So do you have any idea of what the current world record is for the 3x3 Rubik's Cube?
I have no idea.
I'll give you a hint. It's seconds.
See, that's amazing. That just makes my head explode. But what is it?
4.22 seconds.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah, it's very impressive for a lot of speed cubers as well. So,
yes. See, I would have to take a hammer and just break it and then put it back together in the right order or something.
Did you do anything with your original cube? Any sticker peeling or anything like that?
No, I did not. I had a friend of mine that peeled the stickers, and I was like, no, if I'm going to solve this thing, I'm going to solve it, honestly or whatever. But I would imagine that my original cube is somewhere at my sister's house, because that's where I grew up, and it's probably in an old toy box somewhere in the basement. So.
Okay, so if you were to get another cube, have you thought of any techniques you might use to try to solve it?
Well, yeah, now I would listen to your show. Obviously, that would be one, and then probably go to YouTube. And because when you say strategies, I'm like, I didn't even know there were strategies. It reminds me a little bit. My dad used to play chess, and he knew all these different, series of moves, and they all had different names. Oh, you use the old that's the Queen Reich step 13 method, and I'm like, the what? I didn't know this stuff existed. So it reminds me a little bit about like that, where you have these different methods to solve the puzzle. So that would be the first thing. I would just go to Uncle Google and go, all right, Rubik's Cube methods, and see what comes up and start flattening that learning curve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is a new cube coming out. It's called the Go Cube, and you can, you download an app on your phone, and it kind of teaches you, as you do a move, it shows the move on your phone. So that's coming out next year, and it's a great way for beginners to get into speed cubing.
Interesting.
I'll have to send you the link, and I'll have the link in the show notes as well. So, transitioning from the Rubik's Cube to podcasting, what about podcasting is so unique?
I think the biggest thing, if you compare it to magazines and movies and TV and radio, this is something that you 100% own. And there are very few things that you can say in life, this is mine. If you're married and you have a spouse, well, then you've got this shared thing. Or if you're when you're growing up, well, it's kind of yours, but it's maybe your parents have something to do with it. This is something you can say, this is mine. I paid for it. It's mine, and I own it. And I can kind of do whatever I want. There's no committee. There's no radio head that's going to say, no, you've got to do it this way or whatever. It's yours, and you can do with it whatever you want. I think that's one of the things that really makes it unique.
Do you have a tip, for new podcasters? What's your biggest tip?
Well, I would stay away from – it's really easy to want to get into it, and we all like to save money, but there are a couple of different platforms that are really horrible. One is SoundCloud. The other one is Anchor. In fact, right now Anchor is spamming a bunch of people, trying to get them to leave whatever they're using now for a media host to join them, and that's just horrible business. I mean, who wants to join somebody who is spamming you? That's kind of odd. And their terms of service are pretty awful, to where they kind of own your content, and it's just, on one hand, it looks super great because you can record a podcast on your phone and it's free, but in the long run, that company's probably not going to be around. They've already blown through about $14 million, and they still aren't making any profit. And typically, this is not the first time a free media host has come around. There have been about 4 or 5 others, and they usually last about 30 months, and then they run out of money and go away. So that would be something else I would avoid.
Okay, but could you explain what a media host is?
Sure. A media host is somebody that will, like you have a web host, or Facebook is kind of a web host that hosts pages and pictures and things like that. A media host is designed to upload either an audio or a video file, and then that is used in your podcast. And sometimes you think you could use a web host because it'll say things like unlimited bandwidth and unlimited storage. Well, that's for a website, which websites are actually very small in size when you look at the actual content. And now if you start to get popular and you've got a couple hundred, maybe a couple thousand people that want to grab this one MP3 file all at the same time, it's not a bandwidth issue. It's the fact that the actual mechanical server can't keep up with all these people trying to grab that one media file all at the same time. And it tends to kind of stress them out, which then makes your website run slow. And so that's what a media host does. And most of them provide a thing called an RSS feed. And if this was radio, here in Ohio, where I'm from, one of the popular stations is 100.7. Well, an RSS feed is basically your signal, and where you use a radio to tune to a radio frequency. In podcasting, you subscribe to this RSS feed, and in the same way that if I was to look at a radio sound wave, it would just be a bunch of gibberish. And if you were to actually look at an RSS feed, it's the same thing. It's just a bunch of gibberish and links to different things, but you can't really read it. But when you put that into an app, okay, now I can read it, and I can click on things, and I can download things. And it's the same thing when you tune to a radio signal. Okay, now I can understand this. It's something I can listen to, and I'm hearing talk, and I'm hearing music and things of that nature. So your media host is kind of your your backbone of your podcast. It's a pretty important piece, and usually they give you things like stats so you can see how many people are downloading and things of that nature.
Okay. What irritates you most about new podcasts or podcasts that don't listen to you or other podcasts about podcasting?
I think probably the big one is they want to make money yesterday. Like they'll start a podcast, they don't really put any thought into it, and they think they're funny. Like you might have a best friend. Like if me and my best friend got together, I know when we do, his wife is always just kind of rolling her eyes because she doesn't get half the jokes that we do because they're old inside jokes that we've known each other since we were in the 6th grade. So we got a lot of old inside jokes, and she doesn't get any of them. And that's really what happens a lot in podcasting. You start a podcast with your best friend, and you're just yucking it up, and your audience is like, I don't get, why is this funny? What did he say? He said horse, and why is he laughing at the word horse? I don't get it. So that's always kind of bad. And then it's in generally not a very good show. And then they come to me and they're like, yeah, I'd like to quit my day job in about 6 months. And you're like, yeah, it's not, I guess it's kind of frustrating. It's I don't know if it's frustrating or more disappointing that someone has been sold a bill of goods to think they can do that, because if you start any kind of business, you're probably not going to make money the first 6 months because you have to go build that audience. You have to get all your customers and stuff to start coming. If it was a restaurant, start coming to your restaurant and then recommending it to their friends so you get more people coming in. And it just takes a little time. And I understand that. I mean, we all want to just start and go gangbusters, but I think somebody out there is setting unrealistic expectations because it takes a little while to get your show off the ground.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So this episode, we are celebrating International Podcast Day, and that is on September 30th. Dave Jackson, what are you doing for International Podcast Day?
I'm doing a couple things. I plan on going to a mall and just stopping people and asking them what their favorite podcast is. And if they go, what's a podcast, I'm going to show them. So I'm just going to try to muster up my courage because that's kind of outside my comfort zone to just go up and talk to strangers, but I'm going to try that.
That's a cool idea.
And then the other thing I'm going to do is a member of the School of Podcasting, her name is Carrie Bond. She does a show about, it's a place down in Florida, Key West. And she just went to her Facebook page and said, why don't you tell me what are some of your favorite hobbies? And somebody said something like the banjo. And so she went out and found a podcast about banjos and said, here, you should listen to this. And somebody else said, whatever, I like to knit. Oh, here's a knitting podcast. Somebody else said, I like to cook. Here's a podcast about cooking. Because a lot of people that don't listen to podcasts, they don't listen because they're like, why would I listen? They don't know what they're missing. And so by asking people, what are you into? And then say, oh, here's a podcast, they're hopefully more likely to listen to that. And podcasting is a little bit like Lay's potato chips. Once you listen to one, you then go find more and more and more. And that's kind of what we want. Even if it's not a podcast that I make, if we get more people listening, then they're going to tell two friends and they're going to tell two friends. And we'll get, everybody's downloads will go up because we can just get a whole bunch of people to start listening. Because I went to a picnic over the summer and my one cousin finally looked at me and said, okay, I'm going to ask. I'm going to feel stupid, but I'm going to ask. And I go, what? And she's like, what's a podcast? How do I get these things? And I said, do you have an iPhone? And she said, yeah. And I go, well, come here, I'll show you. And then my other cousin's like, well, I have an iPhone. Oh, well, I have an Android. Can I get one on an Android? Yes. And I just did a little session there on how to subscribe to a podcast. And I think if we can all just get if nothing else, just our family and our friends listening to podcasts, that would, it's not going to make a giant spike in downloads, but I think it's one of those things. It's like planting a seed. I think over time, if we can just get everybody to tell one friend, hey, do you listen to podcasts? Let me help you find a podcast you might like. I think in the end, we're all going to kind of benefit from that.
So could you explain the story? How did International Podcast Day become a thing?
It's Dave Lee and Steve Lee are the guys behind it. And I actually helped on the very first one. So did Daniel J. Lewis. Ray Ortega was involved. We kind of got together. And I think it was Steve Lee was listening in the car, and it was something like whatever day it was, and it was like Grandparents' Day or Apple Pie Day or whatever, some sort of off the wall thing. And he's like, "Why don't we have a podcast day?" And so we kind of did some research to kind of figure out when Adam Curry and Dave Weiner more or less invented podcasting. We figured out it was somewhere in September, and why they picked September 30th, I don't know, but that's fine. So I think somebody found like one of the earliest podcasts, and it came out on September 30th. So we're kind of taking that as the birth of podcasting. And so Steve just started it, and it was just a matter of trying to get all the podcasters, because you got to realize, I think this is year 4 or 5, every year it gets a little bigger. And so it was just trying to get everybody together to just, again, talk to their audience and say, hey, why doesn't everybody go talk about podcasting for a day? Because if you hear, let's say you're at work and somebody listens to a podcast and they hear somebody say, you should ask somebody about a podcast or whatever, and somebody else hears the same thing, and all of a sudden you're at work and you hear like 2 or 3 people going, yeah, what podcast you listen to, it's just more likely that somebody's going to go, what is this podcast thing that you guys are talking about? So we're just hoping that it just creates some interest, some curiosity from people, and hopefully we can educate those people that are curious and give them something to listen to.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely a good excuse to talk about podcasting. I always get excited at the end of September because there's something to talk about, although I am trying now to talk about podcasting in other times as well, not just in September.
Yeah. I mean, I do something. This month I'm doing this little special thing, but I might do that every now and then because it's a great idea. And so for me, every day is kind of International Podcasting Day. And then Steve and Dave actually have a thing. It's at internationalpodcastingday.com, and they actually do a live streaming webinar for more or less 48 hours, because it starts on the 29th, and you're like, wait, I thought you said it was the 30th. Yeah, but on the 29th in the US, it's actually the 30th, I think, in New Zealand. So it actually starts on the 29th and runs for about a day and a half, and they have all sorts of speakers. I'm going to be there on Thursday night, and it should be a lot of fun. But what's interesting is as the night goes on, the language changes, because now it's late in the US, and people in Poland and Germany will take over the stream, and that's always kind of interesting. And I always just feel bad because both Dave and Steve are kind of running all that, and by the end of the thing, they both had about 2 hours sleep. So they put a lot of work into it.
Okay, so as a podcast listener, what are some good things you can do? Because you can still celebrate even though you're not a podcaster.
Sure. I mean, it can be anything from writing a review of your favorite podcast, share it out on social media, whether that's Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or whatever it is, just do something to get the word out. And, I always, or email whoever the host is. Anytime you can let a host know that you're listening, that kind of puts gas back in their tank, because sometimes we feel like, is this thing on? Is anybody listening? So if you can email the host, that's always kind of cool. And just anything you can to, get other people to listen. And the people that are, let them know that you listen. And it's just kind of a big pep rally for podcasting.
Well, thank you, Dave, for taking the time to come on the podcast. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Oh, thanks for having me. This was great.
That was a great conversation we had. I enjoyed talking with him. And now, here's my conversation with Emily Prokop from the Story Behind podcast. I've been listening to her show since December of last year as well. And I really love her show. You can find her show at thestorybehindpodcast.com, and I recommend you subscribe. So here's my conversation with Emily. Emily Prokop, thanks for joining me today on the Corner Cutter podcast.
Thanks for having me, Josh. This is awesome.
So starting right off, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're coming from, so listeners can get a better idea on why you're giving these answers.
Yeah, I'm not a cuber, unfortunately, but I wish I were. I honestly wish I were because it's just so cool to watch people cubing and do it so quickly. But I do a history podcast. I do the story behind. It's a short 5 to 10 minute podcast about the history of everyday objects, and it comes out once a week. And I'm writing a book. Well, I'm done writing a book, but the book based on the podcast is coming out in a few weeks, so that's really exciting. So yeah,
Cool.
That's me. And I also do podcast editing on the side. So
That's a business?
yeah. The podcast editing is the business side. That's how I make the money to run my own podcast and pay the bills. And I ended up getting into podcasting and doing it for fun, and found out that I was one of those rare unicorns in Facebook groups where everybody would complain about editing. And meanwhile, I'm like, oh my God, no, I love it. I love editing. What are you guys complaining about? Like, I'll do it. It's fine. You want to pay me to do this? Really? Okay, cool. So
yeah,
that's how that worked out.
I don't like how long each day are you actually editing? Because that would kind of drive me crazy as a job.
The funny thing is, editing myself, it's easier, but it's also more annoying because I've already listened to it. But editing for other people, I've never heard the show before. This is my first time hearing it. So I'm getting to listen to a podcast while at the same time getting to pause and clean it up. And then I still get the information out of it. So again, I was a big podcast listener before I was a podcaster. So
I
awesome.
hadn't thought about it that way. That's interesting.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, so I'll take on clients and I like to ask them about their show and what their show is about, because one of the number one things is I want to be able to edit a show that I would like to listen to, and not a show that, oh my God, I have to edit this show again. It's so boring. It's going to put me to sleep. And luckily, all my clients who I've taken on and who've reached out to me, their podcasts are great. And it's funny, I have two that are financial podcasts, and I know nothing about the space, but listening to them, it's like, oh, wait, so this is how a budget works. This is how to pay back school loans. This is what I should tell my kids before they get into college. I mean, the stuff that you learn on podcasts, it's like you should get another degree for sometimes.
Yeah, I love listening as well. So jumping into the cubing part of the show, what was your first encounter with the Rubik's Cube?
I saw a Rubik's Cube for the first time at my cousin's house, and I had no idea what it was. I was very young, probably 8 or 9, and I remember seeing it, and it was in the corner of their room. They weren't even playing with it, but I just saw this cube of multicolor stickers on it, and I went over and looked at it and said, what is this? And they're like, oh, it's a Rubik's Cube, and they showed me how to move stuff around, and I was like, oh, this is really fun. Like, I just like the fidgeting aspect of it. So you could tell, like, a fidget cube, I have a fidget cube, I have a fidget spinner. I love things I could just play with my hands. And they're like, yeah, you're supposed to make all the sides match with their colors. And I was like, yeah, no, that's really hard. Well, now you gave me that challenge, and now it's hard. I just thought this was fun and I could move stuff around. I didn't realize there was a point to it. But I remember every time I came over for probably a year or two, I would go right for the Rubik's Cube. And I don't know why I never asked my parents for one. Actually, I think since it was probably the late 80s, early 90s when I discovered it. And at that point, they weren't as easy to find. It was something that my cousins had from the 80s. And it wasn't something that was just like readily available in stores like now it is. And now you can just get anything on Amazon. But there were things that I remember my cousins having from growing up. And they were 7 and 9 years older than I was. And I was like, these toys are so awesome. My parents would be like, they don't make them anymore. I don't know. Maybe my parents were lying to me, though, so that they just wouldn't have to buy me more toys. So actually, I don't really know. So they did that sort of stuff.
Interesting fact is a Rubik's Cube and a speed cube are kind of really different. Rubik's cubes are very hard to turn, very tight, but speed cubes, you can finger trick them, so you just, like, you can turn one side just with one finger, so it's super easy to turn.
That's what I've heard. I've heard that the original Rubik's cubes, people are like, no, those are actually much harder. and they go and they buy the knockoff ones or the ones that you can get. I think it's like the Chinese supply of cubes, and they're like they're so much faster. And my daughter has one, but the thing is, it's not like a Rubik's cube. It's not actual colors. It's 6 different pictures that you're trying to line up, which for some reason for me is so much harder. And I'm just like, no, I need to find one that's an actual color cube.
I've seen a bunch of those, but I don't have one myself.
Oh, they're so hard because it's not just making the colors match, it's making sure that the picture and all the sides are the right side up for the picture. So I don't know if we will ever just get one side done. And actually, that is one thing with my cousin's cube. I remember being able to finish one side and then thinking that, okay, I have one side done, the rest should work, right? And then I turned it around and like nothing else matched. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so hard.
So, have you ever met somebody that could actually solve it?
I haven't, no. You're the first person I met who could solve it.
Okay, cool.
And when Dave Jackson said something like, 3.8 seconds for him, I was like, what? That's not real. That's not real time. It takes me 3.8 seconds to even like find a Rubik's Cube.
Yeah, well, actually, I average around 13 or 14 seconds. With the 2x2 cube, though, I average around 3 seconds.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's really fun for me. When you first heard about my podcast and about speed cubing, what was your initial thoughts?
I think it was along the lines of, well, there's definitely a podcast for everybody. Because it's so niche. But then when I listened to it, and I heard that you had audience feedback, I'm like, of course he has audience feedback. Like, those people who are really, really into it, I'm sure they love hearing about it, and they love hearing from other people who like it. Just like I binge listen to podcasts about podcasting, and a new one comes out, and I'm like, oh my God, what do you have to say about it? And my husband will sit there. He's like, don't you already like kind of know everything that's going on? I'm like, there might be something new. Like, I don't know. I don't know what I don't know. So people go out and they find the podcast that they love, and I think it's awesome you're doing it.
Thanks. Yeah. So, do you have any idea what the current world record is for the 3x3 cube?
No. I would have to say probably
just throw a number out.
I'm going to throw out 2 seconds.
A little low. It's actually 4.22, but
okay.
But that's like official at a competition, and people have solved it faster than that at home.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, it's getting extremely fast.
That's crazy.
So, if you got a Rubik's Cube, what would be some of the things or tricks you would try to do to solve it? Like, throw anything out there. We just want to hear your thoughts.
You know what I would do, actually? I'd get a Rubik's Cube, and it would be new out of the package, and I wouldn't move it at all. I wouldn't move anything around and just display it and be like, yeah, I did that.
That's good. Yeah. My first Rubik's Cube, we got it as a family Christmas present, and we looked at it, it was like so nice, and then my dad scrambled it, and I was like, oh, why did you do that? We'll never get it back. And then it was a few years later when I finally learned how to solve it.
Oh, wow. The thing is, I would like playing with it. Like, I don't know if I would want the actual Rubik's Cube. I would want the ones that are easy to turn because, again, I really like that fidgeting aspect where I have something to do with my hands. Like, I'm always moving stuff around. I always have a pen in my hand, or I'm playing with my hair. Just like, I love that just fidgeting aspect. And those little hand puzzles. I don't know if you've probably come across them, like the nails that are intertwined together and you have to break them apart and stuff. I love just playing with my hands, and something like a Rubik's Cube. I would just sit there and turn it without any sort of care or any sort of pattern, I think, or strategy is the word I'm looking for. And I would just sit there and turn it and hope for the best. So
it is fun just turning it. Like, without just random moves.
Yeah.
So transitioning from cubing to podcasting, What is your
I
favorite
love
thing
the
about
fact that I can
podcasts?
learn anything. It was kind of like when I was around 13 or 14 and we had gotten a computer for the first time and we were able to, this was a little bit before Google was big. So like I could go on, but the fact that I could just search for anything and find out any information at all on the internet was just like huge for me. And the fact that podcasts now allow me to do that, but in audio form where I learn better, it's like I wish that I could have had podcasts in college. I wish I could have taken college courses via podcast while I was driving around and doing other things, because that's just, it's one of my favorite ways to learn. And there are certain things about podcasts and um, the podcast hosts in general where like you connect with a host and you learn a lot from them. You remember what they say. And then there are shows where I've learned something and I remember exactly where I was driving when I learned that fact. So when I pull it back, I'm like, oh, by the way, did you know? And I heard this on a podcast and I heard it while I was driving on 95 in Brantford. You know, and people are like, well, why do I care about that? I'm like, I don't know. It's just stuck in my head there. So I think that's what I love about podcasts. And what I love about podcasting is just there's really something for everyone and you can learn so much from them.
Mm-hmm. So how did you have the idea to launch the Story Behind podcast?
That was actually when I was pregnant. I had just finished my first podcast. My co-host and I kind of had falling out and we ended the podcast, and I still just loved the space and I loved podcasting. And again, I loved editing. And I wanted something else to be able to do that with. And I had a podcaster friend. He's Nick from the Epic Film Guys podcast. And he just kept texting me. He's like, you have to get back on the mic. We miss you. Like, we miss having a podcast with you on the mic and you're great at it. You got to get back on the mic. I'm like, I don't have any ideas and I don't want to continue the show without my co-host. And I don't really want to do it. Like, I just, it was so awkward. I couldn't even look at a microphone. Again, I was pregnant, so there was hormones going on too, and I was like, I can't even look at a microphone without crying. So, but there was one day I got a pregnant craving for pink lemonade, and I walked down on my lunch break to the gas station. I got pink lemonade, and I brought it back, and I looked at it, and I'm like, oh, it's not like pink lemonade, like raspberry or cherry flavored or strawberry flavored or anything like that. It's just pink lemonade, and it had a picture of a lemon with a pink inside, and I had to think for a second, like, wait, do they make pink lemons? What? Wait, where did pink lemonade come from? So that was really like the first idea that I had of just like, what is the story behind pink lemonade? And I did a Google search and I found 2 stories that were really interesting, and I'm sitting there with this information. I'm like, I have no one to tell. And I was like, wait, I could do a podcast about this. Not just about the lemonade part, like those were just very quick things, but I could do a podcast about the story behind everyday objects. And like, then the name came to me right then. I remember texting Nick and being like, I finally have an idea. What do you think of this? It doesn't matter what you think of it. I already bought the URL, so I'm doing it. But what do you think of it? He was just like, yes, just get behind the mic. I don't care what you do. Just get behind the mic and do it. And it turned into just, I love this show so much because there really are stories behind everyday objects that you might just think, oh, okay, so a paper clip, somebody just figured, oh, let me just bend some wire and fasten some paper together. And no, there's so much more. There's like looking into what people used before these everyday objects, or the story of, there are different stories behind everyday objects. So there are some historians who believe one thing and some historians who believe another thing. And one of the things on my list is actually the Rubik's Cube. So that's coming up pretty soon.
Cool.
I think. Yeah.
I'll enjoy that one. I'll make sure to share it on my
know.
podcast when it comes out.
Yeah. One of the things I love doing is if I organize myself well enough and I can get my shows out on time and research ahead of time, usually I like finding quotes and asking other podcasters to read them. So if I find a quote from someone historic talking about Rubik's Cube, you're going to be my guy for that. So
Cool. Yeah, I'll have fun doing that. So what was the process of, or how did the Story Behind book come about?
I had been podcasting. My show had just reached a year. I did episode 100 because I was doing two episodes a week at that point, and then I moved down to 1. But when I got to episode 100, it got such a good response. It was a musical episode. So I did the story behind musicals and I sang the whole thing. Like I made up a song for it and I put it to music and I sang it. And it got such a good reception. And a few weeks later, I got an email from a publishing company saying, hey, we've heard your podcast. What do you think about making it into a book? It's short. So I think if you based chapters on your episodes, they would be short enough and an easy read and something. They called it a boutique book where they could easily sell it and market it to boutiques and places like Urban Outfitters where people just want to grab, a quick history book of fun facts while they're in line at the register and then end up buying it. They're like, we think we have a market for this. And they asked me to write it. They sent me instructions and basically I kind of had free reign. And one of my big things was, do I still have the rights to my podcast? Can I still podcast? They're like, yes, we absolutely want you to podcast. We want you to make sure you're talking about the book on your podcast and that you're weaving everything together. And they were nice enough to kind of make a cohesive package for me once the cover was released and approved. And I asked, hey, could you make cover art to match? And they were like, oh yeah, great idea. So it's kind of like now everything is the podcast in the book, the podcast in the book. So.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool how you got it all to fit together like that.
Yeah.
So this episode, we are celebrating International Podcast Day.
Yeah.
What are you doing to celebrate?
I'm probably working, but that also means I'm probably going to be on social media a lot and retweeting people who are using the hashtag International Podcast Day. I'm going to be watching them live. I think they are internationalpodcastday.com/live is going to be the live stream for everything. So I'm going to be in and out watching that. There was one year, my first year of International Podcast Day. I remember I was pretty much up for those 36 hours. They were like, Emily, go to bed. Like, we've gone to bed. You haven't gone to bed yet. Go to bed. I'm like, no, I want to see everything, even the languages I can't understand. I just love it so much. So probably not that this year, but yeah, I will be going out and about and, well, maybe not out and about, but online out and about and kind of talking about podcasts to anybody who will listen. So won't be very much different from every day just talking about podcasts, but at least I'll have more of an excuse because I'll be like, no, we have a day. I have a day. Come on, guys.
Mm-hmm. So as a podcast listener, what are some good ideas that they could do to still celebrate? Because you don't have to celebrate just only if you're a podcaster.
No. Listeners are so important to podcasts, actually. It sounds very obvious. Like, well, you need listeners, but the fact that listeners are kind of the best way to spread the word about podcasts, it's like, if you passed a billboard for a certain kind of soap, for example, you'd be like, okay, that soap exists, whatever. But if your friend was like, hey, I use this soap, this is amazing soap, you're just like, oh, okay, let me go out and buy it the next time I'm in the store. So what listeners can do, bringing that to podcast, I guess marketing, word I want, but to bring that to podcasts is, if you are a listener of a podcast and you really enjoy it and you know somebody else who will enjoy it, definitely share it. If you are in a cubing community or if you have meetups or something, share this podcast with your meetup and be like, hey, are you guys listening to this podcast, by the way? Or even something as simple as, oh, I heard on the Corner Cutter podcast, blah, 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 blah. And that'll just register in people's minds like, oh, there's a podcast about that. That's really cool. I've heard about these podcasts. And if listeners could also teach their friends how to listen to podcasts, they don't even need to spread the word about, oh, well, maybe somebody won't like a certain kind of podcast. But if you could just show people on your phone, most smartphones have a built-in way to listen to podcasts. So if you're on an Android, there's Google Podcasts. If you're on an iPhone, there's Apple Podcasts. So show people how to listen to a podcast, and it's super easy, and let them know it's free. That's a big thing that I have to tell people. And they're like, so how much is your podcast? And I'm like, what do you mean, how much is it? It's free. They're like, so why do you do it? I'm like, I don't know, because I'm an idiot. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think I've had anybody ask me if it's free, but I think that's something that might be turning people off. They just don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, they understand what a podcast is as far as, oh, it's audio that you can listen to. But when people say something like, oh, it's like Netflix, but for audio, they automatically think, oh, I have to pay for something. Like, no, you don't. It's free. Don't worry. It's free. We gotcha.
Exactly. Well, Emily, thanks for taking the time to come on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I hope everybody has a great International Podcast Day. I hope you share podcasting with other people. I will be for sure. I love talking about podcasting. So all the stuff I mentioned in this episode and the guests mentioned, you can find at thecornercutterpodcast.com in the show notes for this week. And if you have any feedback on anything we mentioned, or if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please email me feedback at thecornercutterpodcast.com. I want to thank Emily and Dave for coming on the podcast one more time. And now it's time to take this episode back to the scrambling table. And I'll talk with you guys again next week in episode 54 of the Corner Cutter Podcast.
Hi, this is Emily Prokop from The Story Behind, and you've been listening to the Corner Cutter Podcast.